Under the fractured gaze of a sun unwilling to yield, a child's scream etched the first scar upon the world's forgotten edge. Ceres Moonveil had always been a shadow woven into the frost-bitten tapestries of Eldridge Pack, her existence a whisper against the howling winds that carved the northern spires. Born 24 winters past, during that cursed alignment when solstice sun bled into midnight moon, she entered the world not as a blessing, but as a harbinger. The elders, their faces etched like ancient runes in weathered stone, had declared it so from the cradle. "A curse," they murmured in the great hall, their voices echoing off walls of ice-veined granite, born of celestial discord, to unravel the threads of our harmony. Her mother's pleas dissolved into the ether, her father's defiance silenced by the silver chains of pack law. And on the eve of her 5th naming day, as snowflakes danced like indifferent specters outside the temple's arched maw, they branded her. The iron seared her shoulder, a blooming agony that tasted of ash and salt on her tongue. Ceres remembered the sizzle, the way her small body arched against the elder's unyielding grips, her cries swallowed by the rhythmic chants invoking the moon goddess's mercy, a mercy that never came. The mark was no mere scar. It pulsed like a living thing, a twisted crescent encircled by thorns, glowing faintly under moonlight as if the goddess herself had turned away in disdain. From that night, she became the pack's living omen, shuttled to the fringes of the mountain citadel, where the wind's lament was her constant companion. Servant she was, scrubbing hearths caked with soot from eternal fires, hauling water from frozen streams that bit like fangs, her hands chapped and raw under the unrelenting grip of winter. The kingdom of Eldridge sprawled across jagged peaks, a realm where the earth lay barren, not from sun-scorched thirst, but from the moon's jealous veil. Droughts here were not of rain withheld, but of life stifled, fields locked in perpetual frost, rivers choked to icy veins, herds thinned by blizzards that howled like vengeful spirits. Conflicts simmered in the shadowed valleys below, rival packs encroaching on borders frayed by scarcity, their alphas snarling territorial claims under blood-red moons. Whispers of war slithered through the citadel's corridors, carried on the breath of scouts returning with frost-rimed fur and haunted eyes. "The curse spreads," they said, eyes flicking toward Ceres as she knelt by the fire pits, her branded shoulder hidden beneath threadbare wool. She felt their stares like barbs, each one drawing fresh blood from the wound of her isolation. In the quiet hours, when the pack feasted on meager venison in halls aglow with torchlight, Ceres retreated to the outer stables, where the wind's sigh mingled with the low nickers of shaggy mountain ponies. There, alone with the scent of hay and damp stone, she traced the brand's ridges, wondering at the pull it exerted, a subtle thrum, like a distant heartbeat echoing her own. Dreams plagued her then, visions of eclipsed skies where sun and moon entwined in cataclysmic dance, and a voice like silken frost whispered of balances unbroken, cycles restored. But dawn always shattered them, dragging her back to the grind of servitude, her omega nature a quiet ache that yearned for connection yet recoiled from the pack's disdain. As the winters deepened, so did the omens. The great eclipse loomed in the Starkeeper's charts, a total shroud foretold for the harvest moon, when the sun would bow to lunar dominion. Blizzards ravaged the slopes, burying outposts and claiming warriors. Rival incursions left borders scarred with claw marks and frozen gore. The elders convened in the lunar temple, its domes carved to mimic the goddess's crescent throne, their council fires casting elongated shadows that danced like accusations. Ceres was summoned one eve, dragged from her pallet by grizzled betas whose grips bruised her arms. She stood before them in the chamber's chill heart, the air thick with incense of pine resin and sacred herbs, her bare feet numb on the flagstones. "Eldridge bleeds," intoned Elder Thorn, his voice a gravelly rumble, eyes like chips of obsidian fixed upon her mark. "The goddess weeps for our hubris, and you, Ceres Moonveil, are the blight at its core. Born of discord, You invite shadow upon our light. Murmurs rippled through the assembled pack. Alphas with furred cloaks clasped at their throats, Omegas clutching kin, all united in their fear. Cirrus's heart pounded, a wild drum against her ribs, the brand igniting as if freshly forged. She wanted to scream that she was no curse, that the dream spoke of healing, not ruin, but words lodged like thorns in her throat. Instead, she met their gazes, her own eyes, storm gray flecked with silver, holding a quiet defiance born of years in exile. The purification rite? Another elder decreed, his staff tapping the stone like a death knell. At the eclipse's zenith, you will burn upon the altar of renewal. Your ashes will sate the goddess's wrath, mend the cycles you've fractured. The pack's howl rose then, a cacophony of relief and ritual fervor echoing off the temple's vaulted heights. Ceres was led away, chains clinking softly against her wrists, the cold seeping into her bones like despair's own breath. Outside, the wind whipped flurries across the courtyard, carrying the distant yuav of wolves on the prowl, as if the wild itself mourned her fate. In the dim cell beneath the citadel, where torchlight flickered like hesitant stars, Ceres curled upon the straw, the brand a furnace against her skin. The eclipse approached, a veil drawn across her world, and in the silence broken only by her ragged breaths, she felt the first stirrings of something ancient, an unyielding pull toward the moon's red embrace, where rejection might forge not death, but an unforeseen dawn. The cell's iron bars wept condensation in the pre-dawn chill, each drop a hesitant tear tracing the stone like veins of forgotten rivers. Ceres lay motionless on the straw, her body a taut bowstring, the brand on her shoulder throbbing in rhythm with the distant rumble of thunder over the peaks. Sleep evaded her, chased away by visions that clawed at the edges of her mind, flames licking skyward, a crimson moon devouring the sun, and a figure cloaked in shadow, reaching not with claws, but with hands scarred by the weight of crowns. She pressed her palm to the mark, feeling its heat seep through her skin, a defiant warmth against the encroaching frost. Outside, the wind's howl grew insistent, carrying the acrid tang of smoke from the citadel's watchfires, as if the world itself braced for the unraveling. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, heavy and uneven, shattering the night's fragile hush. Not the measured tread of her jailers, but something primal, laced with the rasp of labored breath. Ceres bolted upright, heart slamming against her ribs like a caged beast, as shadows twisted in the torchlight spilling through the bars. A figure slumped against the wall opposite her cell, his form massive yet broken, broad shoulders heaving under a cloak rent by thorns and claw, fur matted with blood that gleamed black in the dim glow. He was an alpha. That much her omega senses screamed, the air thickening with his scent. Pine and iron, storm and sorrow, a king's musk undercut by the sharp bite of desperation. His head lifted slowly, revealing eyes like fractured glaciers, blue depths rhymed with exhaustion, pupils dilating as they locked onto hers. A low growl rumbled from his chest, not threat but instinct, the sound vibrating through the stone and into her bones. Ceres recoiled, pressing against the cell's rear wall, the chains at her wrists clinking softly. Fear coiled in her gut, cold as the snowdrifts beyond, yet curiosity flickered beneath it, unbidden. Who was this intruder, slipping past the pack's vigilant betas like a specter? His face, chiseled by battles, long etched into his flesh, bore a scar tracing his jawline, silver against stubble dark as midnight fur. Guilt shadowed his gaze, a melancholy veil that spoke of thrones bartered for survival, of oaths shattered under the moon's unyielding watch. "You!" he rasped, voice gravel over silk, pushing himself upright with a grimace that twisted his features. Blood trickled from a gash above his brow, staining the collar of his cloak. The branded one, the elder's scapegoat. He glanced down the corridor, ears pricking at the faint yuav of patrols drawing near, then back to her, his nostrils flaring as if scenting the truth of her isolation. Ceres's breath hitched, The connection hit like a spark to tinder, instinctive and raw. Her omega essence stirring in recognition of his alpha dominance. Not the brutish claim of her pack's warriors, but something deeper, laced with restraint and regret. Yet she denied it, shoving the warmth away, rationalizing it as survival's cruel jest. He was a stranger, a fugitive perhaps, his presence a harbinger of more ruin in her already doomed hours. "What do you want?" she whispered. Her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs, eyes narrowing against the pull that urged her closer to the bars. The brand pulsed hotter, as if awakening to his nearness, a subtle thrum syncing with the steady beat of his heart, audible even through the stone. He stepped forward, grip tightening on a dagger at his belt, its hilt engraved with lunar crescents, marking him not of Eldridge, but of the rival Stormridge realm, whose king had long been whispered of in fearful tones. Eric Blackthorn, they called him, the melancholy sovereign, haunted by the massacre of his own kin during a betrayed alliance, his rule a fragile throne built on guilt's ashes, fleeing now, it seemed, from the encroaching war that clawed at Eldridge's borders. "Shelter," he admitted, the word heavy as falling snow, his gaze flicking to her chains. "And answers. The eclipse nears, and with it, shadows stir beyond your elder's chance. I've seen the red moon in my dreams, cycles breaking, not mending. You're at its heart." His words hung between them, laced with a vulnerability that cracked his regal facade. The wind outside whipping flurries against the citadel's walls like accusatory fingers. Saris felt the fear twist into something sharper, curiosity born of shared exile, though his was self-imposed, a king's flight from the duty that had cost him everything. She should call for the guards, seal his fate as an invader, but the instinct denied her, whispering of alliances forged in the night's belly. A distant howl pierced the air, pack scouts closing in. Eric's eyes darkened, and in that instant, their gazes entangled, a visceral spark igniting the space between. He moved with predatory grace, testing the cell's lock with trembling fingers, the metal groaning under his strength. Saris's pulse raced, the brand searing as if the moon herself urged her forward. From fear, a fragile bridge extended. From curiosity, the first thread of empathy wove through the chill. As the footsteps grew louder, echoing like judgment's drum, they both knew the refuge they sought would demand more than silence. It would require trust, raw and unearned, in the face of encroaching flames. In the shadowed underbelly of the citadel, where torch flames danced like hesitant stars, hunter and hunted drew breath together, the wind's lament outside a prelude to the storm that would bind or break them. Empathy stirred, tentative as the first melt of spring ice, transforming the alpha's guilt into a shared vigil against the dawn's merciless light. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The torchlight guttered in the draft, casting elongated shadows that clawed across the cell's damp walls like the fingers of encroaching doom. Saris's breath came in shallow bursts, her chains a cold weight against her wrists as she watched Eric Blackthorn work the lock with desperate precision. His fingers, calloused from years of wielding scepters and swords, trembled slightly. Not from fear, she sensed, but from the feverish pull of his wounds, the blood scent mingling with the metallic tang of rust. The Alpha's eyes, those fractured glaciers, flicked to hers once more, holding a plea unspoken. Trust me, or we both perish. Outside, the howls sharpened, a chorus of eldritch betas closing the noose, their paws crunching through the snow-slick corridors above. With a muffled snap, the lock yielded, the iron gate swinging inward on protesting hinges. Eric lunged inside, his massive frame filling the space, the heat of his body cutting through the chill like a forge's breath. He pressed a finger to her lips, silencing the question forming on her tongue, his touch rough yet strangely gentle. sending an unwelcome shiver down her spine. The connection flared again, instinctive, a Omega's pull toward alpha strength, but she shoved it down, rationalizing it as the haze of survival. He was no savior. He was a storm crashing into her fragile exile, his guilt-scarred soul a mirror to her own branded shame. "Quiet," he murmured, voice a low rumble that vibrated through her chest as he knelt to snap her chains with a hidden tool. A sliver of enchanted bone, glowing faintly with lunar runes from his realm. The links parted with a whisper, freedom's first bitter taste flooding her veins. Saris rubbed her wrists, the skin raw and pale, but before she could stand, the thunder of boots echoed from the stairs. Eric hauled her up, his arm banding around her waist, firm yet yielding, pulling her flush against his side. His scent enveloped her, pine resin and storm-swept earth, undercut by the coppery warmth of blood, stirring something primal she dared not name. They moved as one, slipping into the labyrinthine tunnels beneath the citadel, veins of the mountain carved by ancient floods and forgotten quarries. The air grew thicker, laced with the mineral bite of deep stone and the distant drip of unseen water. Saris's bare feet slapped against the icy floor, each step a jolt that echoed her pounding heart, but Eric's grip steadied her, his free hand pressing against the wall for guidance in the near dark. Behind them, shouts erupted. "Intruder! The curse escapes!" Followed by the clamor of pursuit, lanterns bobbing like malevolent fireflies in the gloom. The common enemy bound them now, the elders' zealots whose fanaticism saw her as blight and him as invader, both threats to their fractured order. Saris's mind raced, piecing together fragments from overheard whispers, Eric's flight from Stormridge, where betrayal had left his pack in ruins, his throne a pyre of lost kin. He had crossed the borders not for conquest, but for sanctuary, drawn by the same red moon visions that haunted her dreams. Empathy flickered in her chest, tentative as a candle in gale winds, transforming her fear into a reluctant alliance. He was broken, like her, a king marked by guilt, his melancholy a shroud, heavier than any crown. They burst into a forgotten chamber, a cavernous hollow where roots of ancient pines pierced the ceiling like skeletal fingers, and a narrow crevice led to the outer slopes. Snow howled through the gap, whipping flurries that stung like needles, the wind carrying the pack's baying cries closer. Eric shoved her toward the crevice first, his body shielding hers from the draft. "Go!" he urged, but she hesitated, turning to face him in the dim light filtering from a jagged skylight above. His face was a map of exhaustion, the scar along his jaw silvered by frost, eyes reflecting the turmoil she felt mirrored in her soul. "Why help me?" she demanded, voice barely above the gale. The brand on her shoulder igniting like embers under his gaze. It pulsed in sync with his breath, a symbolic tether she could no longer deny, though her mind screamed resistance. He was Alpha, she Omega, fated sparks in a world that branded such bonds as weakness. "Because I've burned innocence on altars of duty," he confessed, the words raw, his hand brushing her arm where the mark hid beneath her tattered shift. The touch lingered, warm against the cold, empathy blooming into something deeper, a bond forged in shared shadows. "Your pain, it echoes mine. The goddess doesn't curse, she tests." His voice cracked, guilt etching deeper lines around his mouth, the weight of his past. Alliances shattered, blood on his hands, pouring into the space between them. Saris felt it then, the shift, not just protection from the hunters, but a vigil against their own demons, his melancholy weaving with her isolation like threads in a loom. The howls crested, betas spilling into the chamber's mouth, their eyes gleaming with ritual fury. Eric whirled, drawing his dagger, the blade catching the faint moonlight like a sliver of the goddess's nail. Saris pressed against the crevice, but instinct rooted her. She couldn't leave him to the fray. Grabbing a loose shard of rock, she flanked him, the brand searing as if channeling lunar fire. Together, they faced the onslaught, claws raking stone, breaths heaving in the frozen air. The cavern a battlefield of snarls and strikes. Eric's movements were a dance of restrained power, parrying blows with precision born of kingship, while Ceres dodged and struck, her omega agility a surprising ally. One beta lunged at her, fangs bared, but Eric intercepted, his body taking the slash across his already torn cloak, blood blooming dark against the fabric. Pain twisted his features. Yet he fought on, their backs pressed in unison, a fragile unity against the tide. The bond solidified in that visceral clash, empathy no longer tentative, but a fierce tether, his protection evoking a tenderness she had long buried amid the pain. As the last pursuer fell back, yelping into the night, they stumbled through the crevice into the blizzard-swept slopes, the citadel's lights fading like dying stars behind. Huddled in a snow-dusted hollow beneath overhanging pines, their breaths mingled in white plumes, the wind's wail a mournful lullaby. Eric bound his fresh wound with strips from his cloak, his hands steady despite the tremor of loss in his eyes. Ceres sat close, the heat of his presence a balm against the frost, the brand's thrum a quiet affirmation. In the silence broken only by distant uives, she traced the scar on his jaw, curiosity yielding to compassion. "What cycles do you seek to mend?" she whispered, the question hanging like frost crystals. He met her gaze, the melancholy in his depths softening, a king's guilt yielding to the possibility of redemption. Ones like ours, shattered by fear, restored by choice. The moon, peeking through rifted clouds, bathed them in silver, the eclipse's shadow looming on the horizon, promising trials yet to unfold. In that refuge, born of blood and storm, their bond took root, empathy's fragile bloom defying the world's cruel decree. The blizzard's fury had ebbed to a restless murmur, leaving the hollow cloaked in a hush, broken only by the crackle of a small fire Eric had coaxed from damp tinder. Ceres sat cross-legged on a bed of pine needles, the flames glow painting her skin in flickering gold, chasing the chill that had seeped into her marrow during their flight. Her branded shoulder ached, a persistent ember beneath the makeshift bandage torn from her shift. But it was no longer just pain. It hummed with an unfamiliar vitality, as if the moon's distant gaze had awakened something long dormant. Eric crouched opposite her, his broad frame silhouetted against the encroaching night, methodically sharpening his dagger on a whetstone. His movements were deliberate, each stroke a meditation on restraint, his blue eyes shadowed by the weight of unspoken confessions. The scent of blood and smoke clung to him, a reminder of the betas they'd felled in the cavern, their shared violence a fragile mortar binding their unlikely pact. She watched him, the pull between them no longer a mere instinct but a current, tugging at the edges of her resolve. He was a king in exile, his melancholy a crown of thorns she could almost feel pricking her own heart. Yet resistance lingered, rationalized as the folly of an omega clinging to solitude. Trust was a luxury for those unbranded by fate. The wind sighed through the pines, carrying the faint, acrid promise of the citadel's pyres, where her execution loomed like a specter. They had fled, but not far enough. The eclipse would draw the pack like moths to flame, and with it, the elder's ritual to purge her curse. Eric had spoken little of his own flight, only that visions of a red moon had driven him across the border, seeking the balance his shattered realm so desperately needed. His guilt hung in the air, thick as the frost, a king's remorse for choices that had spilled blood under false moons. As the fire popped, sending sparks spiraling upward like fleeing souls, Ceres felt the brand stir anew. It began as a warmth, spreading from her shoulder through her veins like liquid silver, coiling in her chest until her breath caught. The world sharpened. The flame's heat bloomed vivid against her skin. The rough texture of bark under her fingers etched in exquisite detail, and Irik's heartbeat, steady, burdened, echoed in her ears as if her own. She gasped, clutching her arm, the mark glowing faintly through the fabric, its twisted crescent pulsing with an inner light that mirrored the rising moon's silver edge. Visions cascaded then, unbidden, fractured cycles of sun and shadow. Eldridge's barren fields cracking under eternal winter, Stormridge's rivers running red with the blood of betrayed alliances. But woven through the ruin was restoration. A figure at the center, her figure, hands outstretched to mend the weave, light and dark entwined not in discord, but harmony. Eric's head snapped up, his dagger forgotten as he lunged forward, grasping her shoulders with hands that trembled not from cold, but awe. "Ceres," he breathed, his voice a gravelly prayer, eyes widening as the glow reflected in their glacial depths. The connection surged, no longer resisted but amplified, her omega essence resonating with his alpha core like a key turning in an ancient lock. He traced the brand with reverent fingers, the touch igniting sparks along her nerves, not pain but revelation. In that moment, he saw it. The truth her dreams had whispered, the elders' lie unraveling like frost in dawn's light. She was no curse, but the pathfinder, the living equilibrium born of celestial union, her gift to perceive and realign the broken fates of pacts and realms. The red moon in his visions was no omen of doom, but her awakening, the key to cycles the gods themselves had set in motion. You're the balance," he murmured, his melancholy fracturing into something luminous, guilt yielding to purpose as he held her gaze. The wind stilled, as if the world held its breath, the fire's warmth a symbolic hearth against the encroaching eclipse. Ceres felt the weight of it settle upon her, the domo occulto no longer a burden but a mantle, her isolation forging her into the judge the goddess intended. Yet doubt flickered. Could she wield this power, branded as she was, when the pack's hatred still clawed at her heels? Eric's hands tightened, not in possession but solidarity, his ethical core recognizing the moral precipice. To claim her destiny meant confronting not just the elders, but the shadows within him, the king who had once chosen war over mercy. The moon climbed higher, its disk tinged with the first blush of crimson, the eclipse's shadow creeping across the stars like an encroaching tide. Distant howls rose again, the pack's fervor building toward the ritual. But now Ceres sensed their discord, the elders' arrogance fracturing the very harmony they sought to preserve. Her gift unfurled further, revealing threads of betrayal, thorns hidden pacts with rivals, trading borderlands for power. The droughts, not her doing, but the consequence of greed. She rose, the glow fading but the clarity remaining, her storm-gray eyes flecked with newfound silver resolve. Eric stood with her, his presence a steadfast anchor, the bond between them solidifying into destiny's forge. He was no longer just a fugitive alpha, but her mirror, his guilt the counterweight to her rejection, together the fulcrum for redemption. As they turned toward the citadel's distant spires, where torchlight flickered like a pyre awaiting its offering, the air thickened with the scent of pine and impending storm. The brand thrummed, a lunar heartbeat urging them onward, the revelation not an end, but the spark of trials to come, where love would prove not a balm, but the blade that severed old chains. In the silence of the hollow, broken only by their synchronized breaths, Irik's hand brushed hers, a tentative vow. She was the key, and he, the willing lock, their paths entwined under the goddess's watchful eye. The crimson moon hung low, a bloodied sentinel, as the first shadows of judgment gathered on the horizon. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your... The crimson moon's gaze pierced the veil of storm clouds, casting the citadel's spires in a ruddy hue that bled like an open wound across the snow-swept plains. Ceres trudged onward, her boots sinking into drifts that clutched at her ankles like desperate hands. The brand on her shoulder, a relentless pulse syncing with the earth's own labored breath. Eric walked beside her, his presence a solid warmth against the gale's bite, yet the air between them crackled with unspoken tension, a bond forged in revelation, now tested by the inexorable pull of confrontation. The gift within her hummed, unveiling threads of truth with merciless clarity. The elder's chants masked not piety, but a web of treachery. Elder Thorn at its heart, his secret accords with the rival alpha of Frostvale Pack, trading Eldridge's lifeblood for personal dominion. Droughts and blizzards were no curses, but engineered famines to weaken the realm, her blight the perfect scapegoat to rally the fearful. Her heart twisted, a knot of rage and sorrow tightening with each step closer to the Citadel's gates. Freedom tasted of ash in her mouth. To flee with Eirik meant abandoning the pack that had branded her, leaving cycles fractured in their wake. Yet love, raw, resisted, now blooming in the quiet spaces of his glances, whispered of a different path, one where mercy might eclipse vengeance. She glanced at him, his profile etched sharp against the moonlight, the scar on his jaw a silver reminder of his own betrayals, the king who had once unleashed war to preserve a hollow throne. His guilt mirrored her rejection, their hands brushing in the snow like tentative vows. But the moral precipice loomed. Forgive the pack's blindness, or wield her power as judgment, risking the war that could consume them both. The citadel rose before them, its ice-veined walls groaning under the wind's assault, torchlight flickering from battlements where sentries paced like shadowed wraiths. The eclipse's shadow deepened, the sun a mere sliver swallowed by lunar dominion, and the air thickened with the scent of pine smoke and fear sweat. Distant drums throbbed, the ritual's heartbeat calling the pack to the central square, where the pyre awaited its condemned. Ceres's vision sharpened again, the gift uncoiling like frost-laced vines. She saw Thorn in the temple's sanctum, his obsidian eyes gleaming as he bartered with a cloaked figure. Alpha Kale of Frostvale, his rival's sneer promising alliance in exchange for Eldridge's submission. The traitor elder's staff, carved with false lunar runes, hid vials of alchemical blight, poisons scattered in streams to starve the land and justify her burning. Eirik's hand closed over hers, grounding her as they slipped through the outer wards, shadows cloaking their approach like the goddess's own shroud. "We face them together," he murmured, his voice a low thunder laced with melancholy, the ethical weight of his past etching lines deeper into his brow. He had chosen war once, spilling blood under moons that judged silently. Now, with her, compassion warred with the Alpha's instinct to claim and conquer. Ceres nodded, though doubt clawed at her chest. Love or liberty? To bind her fate to his meant surrendering the isolation that had armored her soul, yet freedom alone felt hollow. A exile extended into eternity. They breached the square under cover of the gathering throng, the pack assembled in a sea of furred cloaks and silvered armor, their faces upturned to the blood moon with fervent awe. The pyre loomed at the center, logs stacked high and oiled, flames already licking at its base in anticipatory hunger. Elder Thorn stood upon the altar, his gravelly voice booming invocations to Aelira, the goddess who had claimed Ceres in vision, but whose mercy the pack now twisted to their ends. "The curse returns!" a beta snarled, spotting them, and chaos erupted. Howls ripping through the night, warriors lunging with claws extended, the air alive with the metallic tang of drawn steel. Ceres stepped forward, the brand igniting like a forge's heart, its glow piercing her cloak and bathing the square in ethereal silver. The pack recoiled, murmurs swelling to a roar as her gift surged, projecting visions into their minds. Thorn's clandestine meetings under frost-rimed arches, Kyle's mocking laughter as borders were sold, the blight sown in sacred groves. "No curse am I," she declared, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs, storm-gray eyes sweeping the crowd. "But the balance you shattered with greed. The goddess named me judge, not victim." The elder whirled, his face paling to ash, staff raised as if to strike, but Eric intercepted, his dagger flashing in the torchlight, pinning Thorn against the altar with restrained fury. The confrontation crested like a blizzard's peak. Kale emerged from the throng, his rival Alpha's form hulking and scarred, eyes burning with opportunistic fire. "The branded whore and the fallen king," he sneered, circling with betas at his flanks, the promise of war hanging thick as blood mist. Thorn's pact ends tonight. Frostvale claims this frozen husk. Clashes erupted, steel ringing on steel, snow churned to crimson slush under stamping feet. Ceres wove through the fray, her agility a lunar grace, the gift guiding her strikes, not to kill, but to disarm, revealing hidden loyalties in flashes of truth. One warrior hesitated, vision showing his kin poisoned by Thorn's hand. Another turned, snarling accusations at the elder. Eric fought at her side, his movements a symphony of power and precision, parrying Kale's brutal swings while shielding her from the tide. A slash grazed his arm, blood welling dark against his skin, and guilt flashed in his eyes, not for the wound, but for the violence he unleashed anew. "End this," he growled to her over the din, his breath hot against her ear, the bond between them a visceral anchor amid the chaos. Ceres faced Thorn, the traitor bound and kneeling, his defiance crumbling under her gaze. The pack encircled them, breaths heaving, the pyre's flames roaring higher as if demanding resolution. "Mercy or war?" she whispered to herself, the dilemma a blade at her throat. Forgiveness meant weaving the cycles anew, offering the pack redemption through truth, but at the cost of her scar's unavenged pain, binding her to Irex's world, love's proof in shared vulnerability. War promised liberty, her power unleashed to shatter the corrupt, yet it would drown the land in blood. Echoing the king's past, she sought to heal. The brand seared, the moon's crimson light bathing her in judgment's fire, and in that suspended breath she chose, not one, but both, compassion as weapon, love as the forge. Thorn's eyes widened as she extended her hand, not in strike, but revelation, the gift flooding him with visions of his own shattered soul. He crumpled, confessions spilling like melting ice, the pack's howls shifting from rage to stunned awakening. Kale lunged, but Irek met him, their clash a storm of fangs and fury, ending with the rival pinned, alliance broken under the weight of exposed deceit. The square fell silent, save for the wind's mournful sigh and the crackle of unclaimed flames, the eclipse waning as sun's light pierced the veil. Ceres turned to Eric, their gazes locking in the aftermath's hush, his bloodied hand reaching for hers. A choice affirmed, yet the spiritual rift lingered. Had mercy crowned them, or merely delayed the war within? The pack watched, breaths held, as the goddess's shadow receded, leaving only the raw edge of what rebirth might demand. The pyre's flames guttered low in the square's hush, their orange tongues licking at the night like a beast denied its feast, casting wavering shadows that danced across the assembled pack's faces etched with the raw etchings of awakening doubt. Ceres stood at the altar's edge, her breath a visible plume in the waning eclipse's chill, the brand on her shoulder now a steady ember rather than a blaze, its glow sinking with the moon's slow retreat as the sun clawed back its sliver of light. Thorn knelt before her, broken not by chains, but by the visions she'd forced upon him, his confessions hanging in the air like frost crystals, the poisoned wells, the bartered borders, the droughts sown from vials of shadow-tainted elixir to fuel his ascent. Kale lay pinned beneath Irek's boot, the rival Alpha's snarls reduced to ragged gasps, his opportunistic empire crumbling under the weight of exposed lies. The pack encircled them, a ring of furred silhouettes, their howls silenced into murmurs that rippled like wind through barren pines, fear yielding to a fragile hunger for truth. Ceres's heart pounded, a wild rhythm against her ribs, the gift still humming in her veins like liquid moonlight, revealing not just treachery but the deeper fractures. Omegas huddled in the throng, their eyes downcast from years of silenced pain. Alphas gripping weapons with hands that trembled, haunted by the blood they'd spilled in blind loyalty. She felt it all, their rejection of her now mirrored in self-reproach, her exile's sting echoing back as collective shame. Yet the choice loomed heavier than the snow-laden peaks above, a moral forge testing her resolve. Mercy had stayed her hand, unveiling the rot without rending flesh. But rebirth demanded more. A sacrifice of the self she'd armored in isolation. A union that bound her not just to Eirik, but to the pack she'd vowed to forget. Love, that resisted flame, now burned steady in his gaze, promising redemption not as reward, but as the price of healing cycles long sundered. Eirik released Kale to the beta's custody, his movements measured, the blood from his wounds staining the snow in dark petals that steamed faintly against the cold. He turned to her, his glacial eyes softened by the firelight, the melancholy that had shadowed him since their meeting, fracturing into something resolute. A king's guilt transmuted into ethical fire. "You've judged them," he said softly, stepping close enough that his warmth pierced the frost between them, his scarred hand hovering near hers without claiming it. The touch, when it came, was light as falling ash, fingers intertwining with a reverence that spoke of choices hard won. He had resisted this pull once, rationalizing it as a fugitive's weakness, his alpha dominance chained by the ghosts of massacres past. Now, acceptance bloomed in the quiet spaces, his presence a counterpoint to her omega ache, weaving light and shadow into balance. But the wind shifted, carrying the acrid tang of distant thunder from the valleys below. Frostvale's reinforcements, drawn by Kale's failed pact, their war cries a low rumble echoing the earth's unrest. The pack stirred, eyes flicking to the horizon where torches bloomed like malignant stars, the rival forces cresting the ridge in a tide of steel and snarling fur. Thorn's treachery had invited not just internal rot, but invasion. The cycles Cirrus was born to mend now teetered on annihilation's brink. She felt the brand flare, a searing reminder of her infancy's iron kiss, the pain transfiguring into power as visions cascaded, rivers thawed under balanced moons, fields greening where blight had reigned. But only if she claimed her role fully, not as victim or judge, but as the living bridge, sacrificing the liberty of flight for the labor of restoration. "No more running," she whispered, more to herself than the throng, her voice carrying on the gale like the goddess's own decree. The pack parted as she ascended the altar, the pyre's embers crackling at her feet, symbolic flames that had sought her end now awaiting her command. Eirik flanked her, his body a shield against the encroaching howls, but she sensed his inner war, the alpha instinct to lead the charge, to drown betrayal in blood as he once had, clashing with the compassion she'd awakened in him. His hand tightened on hers, guilt's shadow yielding to shared purpose. Love proved itself here, not in tender whispers, but in the visceral choice to stand amid the storm, his redemption entwined with hers. She raised her free arm, the brand unveiled, its crescent thorns glowing with an inner silver that pierced the night, drawing gasps from the assembly. The gift unfurled like roots through frozen soil, tendrils of lunar essence weaving into the air, touching each soul in the square. Omegas lifted their heads, feeling the stir of dormant strength. Alphas lowered weapons, visions of mended alliances flooding their minds, Eldridge and Stormridge united not by conquest, but harmony. The invading forces crested the ridge, but faltered as the glow spread, Ceres's power a radiant barrier, revealing to them too the threads of greed that had pitted packs against kin. Kale's betas hesitated, one by one turning blades inward, the moral weight of truth heavier than any command. Yet sacrifice clawed at her core. The brand's light drained her, veins icing over as the balance demanded toll, her body arching in silent agony, breaths shallow as the moon's ebbing dominion. Eirik caught her as she swayed, his arms encircling her waist, the heat of his form a forge against her fading warmth. "Ceres," he murmured, voice thick with unspoken fear, his lips brushing her temple in a vow forged of blood and frost. In that union, resisted no longer, they became the fulcrum, her gift channeling through his ethical resolve, mending the rift not with war's blade, but compassion's quiet fire. The invaders knelt, not in defeat, but revelation, the cycles realigning under the goddess's approving sigh, the wind carrying away the last echoes of discord. The square transformed in the hush that followed, embers of the pyre flickering into harmless sparks that drifted skyward like liberated souls, the sun fully emerging to gild the snow in dawn's tentative gold. Ceres leaned into Eirik, exhaustion weaving with renewal, her rejection reborn as queenship, not of thrones, but of healed hearts. The pack approached, tentative, offering cloaks and bowed heads, thorns chains a symbol of justice tempered by mercy. Yet in the quiet aftermath, as distant Uves blended into harmonious chorus, a deeper dilemma lingered. Had they truly escaped the shadows within, or merely forged a fragile peace, where love's proof demanded eternal vigilance against the arrogance that birthed curses anew? The crimson moon faded to silver, but its light lingered in their joined hands, a beacon against the gathering light, whispering that rebirth was no end, but the dawn of choices yet to unfold. The dawn's tentative gold crept over the spires like a hesitant lover, gilding the snow in fragile halos that caught the last whispers of the crimson moon's retreat. Ceres drew a ragged breath, her body heavy in Eirik's arms, the brand's glow fading to a soft thrum against her skin, as if the goddess herself exhaled in quiet approval. The square lay transformed, no longer a cauldron of ritual fury, but a cradle of stunned renewal. Embers from the pyre scattered like fallen stars. The pack's forms huddled in cloaks of frost-rimed wool, their eyes reflecting the silvered resolve that her gift had kindled. Thorn's chains clinked softly as Betas led him away, his once gravelly voice reduced to murmurs of contrition, while Kale's invading forces knelt in the drifts beyond the walls, their weapons lowered, faces etched with the visions of mended cycles that had pierced their armored hearts. The wind sighed through the pines, carrying away the metallic tang of blood and the acrid bite of unspent flames, leaving only the crisp scent of thawing earth, a promise, perhaps, of rivers freed from ice. Yet in the hush, Ceres felt the weight of rebirth not as triumph, but as a blade's edge, carving deeper into the scars of her soul. Her gift had unraveled the treachery, weaving truth through the pack's fractured loyalties like lunar threads mending a torn veil. But the sacrifice lingered, a hollow ache in her chest where isolation had once armored her. She had chosen mercy over vengeance, compassion's fire to temper the war that clawed at the borders, yet freedom's illusion shattered now. Destiny bound her not to exile's solitude, but to this realm's healing, her omega essence entwined with the pack's redemption. Eirik's arms tightened around her, his breath warm against her temple, the heat of his body a counterpoint to the chill seeping back into her veins. His scent, pine and iron, now laced with the fresh bloom of hope, stirred the bond they'd resisted, rationalized as survival's fleeting spark. Acceptance bloomed here, in the raw vulnerability of dawn, love proving itself not as balm, but as the forge, demanding her surrender. She pulled back slightly, her storm-gray eyes meeting his glacial depths, flecked now with the gold of emerging light. The scar along his jaw caught the sun's first rays, silver turning to ancient warmth, a map of the guilt that had driven him from his throne, the massacres under betrayed moons, the oaths shattered by ambition's shadow. "What have we wrought?" she whispered, her voice a thread of silk over gravel, the brand pulsing faintly as if echoing her doubt. The pack watched from the periphery, their breaths a collective hush, Omegas stepping forward with tentative grace, alphas sheathing blades with hands that trembled from the moral quake. Faith had eclipsed despair in their gazes, yet Ceres sensed the fragility. One whisper of renewed arrogance, and the cycles could fracture anew. Her role as pathfinder, a eternal vigil against the darkness that birthed her pain. Eric's hand cupped her face, thumb tracing the line of her cheek where frost had kissed it pale. His touch igniting a visceral warmth that spread through her like fire through dry tinder. "A beginning," he murmured, his voice low and resonant, carrying the melancholy of a king who had learned redemption's cost. Ethical restraint defined him still, the alpha who chose not to claim but to yield, his dominance softened by the guilt that mirrored her rejection. In his eyes, she saw the choice laid bare: union, not as conquest, but as shared sacrifice, his past's blood washing clean in the waters of her gift. The wind stirred again, whipping flurries that danced around them like celebratory spirits, distant howls blending into a harmonious chorus from the valleys. Where Frostvale's knelt warriors rose to oaths of alliance, borders redrawn not in steel, but in the balance of light and shadow. Ceres felt the pull then, deeper than instinct, a spiritual tether, the goddess's claim manifesting not in visions, but in the quiet certainty of her heart. She stepped onto the altar's edge, the wood still warm from the pyre's unfulfilled hunger, and raised her arms. The brand unveiled once more, its twisted crescent thorns glowing with a soft, inner silver that bathed the square in ethereal light. The pack drew closer, their footsteps crunching softly in the snow, breaths syncing with hers in a rhythm as ancient as the moon's phases. Her gift unfurled one final time, not as revelation's storm, but as healing's gentle tide, tendrils of lunar essence weaving through the air, touching branded souls and weary frames. Omegas felt strength bloom in their cores, the ache of silenced years easing like ice under spring's thaw. Alphas sensed the weight of their crowns lighten, compassion eclipsing the thirst for power. Even Thorn in his chains bowed his head, tears carving paths through the grime on his face, the elder's arrogance dissolved into humble rebirth. But the toll mounted. Her vision blurring at the edges, the brand searing as it drew from her essence to mend the land's deeper wounds. The barren fields stirring with unseen green, rivers murmuring promises of flow beyond the frozen veins. Sacrifice was her crown, the liberty of flight with Eric alone, traded for this queenship of cycles restored, her isolation's end in the embrace of a pack once cruel. Pain lanced through her, sharp as the iron of her childhood branding, yet she welcomed it, breaths coming in measured gasps, the texture of snow under her feet grounding her amid the ethereal weave. Eric was there, his arms encircling her from behind, a pillar of unyielding support, his heartbeat a steady drum against her back. Love's proof in this visceral union, his ethical soul the anchor to her spiritual flight. As the light peaked, the brand's glow crested and ebbed, leaving her spent but whole, the square alive with the pack's awed silence broken only by the soft patter of melting snow. Ceres turned in his hold, their foreheads touching, breaths mingling in white plumes that caught the dawn's gold. "We are the balance," she said. The words a vow etched in frost and fire, destiny yielding to the freedom of choice they'd claimed together. The goddess's presence lingered, a silken whisper in the wind, affirming the rebirth. Rejection transmuted to rain, guilt to grace, love as the redemptive flame that illuminated shadowed thrones. The sun rose fully now, bathing the mountains in deep blue skies streaked with ancient gold, the moon a faint crescent fading into day. Eric's lips brushed hers in a kiss born of blood and renewal, tender amid the tragedy, a seal on the paths they'd forged. The pack knelt as one, howls rising in unity, the symbolic fire of the pyre reduced to warm ash underfoot, blood stains washed away by the first trickles of thaw. Yet in that poignant hush, Ceres knew the truth. Rebirth was vigilance eternal, compassion's quiet war against despair's return, their bond the eternal moon keeping watch. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.